March 1945 arrived in Bavaria like a held breath that refused to release. Winter had overstayed its welcome, clinging stubbornly to the land even as the war itself staggered toward its end. Snow lay in dirty patches along the edges of a stone courtyard that had once belonged to a small municipal building. Now it served a different purpose: temporary detention, temporary judgment, temporary mercy, depending on who held the power that day. 40 women were marched into the open square before sunrise. They came from nearby villages, factories, and farms, clerks, seamstresses, nurses, widows. Some had been accused of aiding the German war effort, others of nothing at all. At that stage of the war, guilt and innocence often blurred together under the weight of fear and exhaustion. They were herded into uneven lines by shouted commands they barely understood, their boots slipping on frozen stone. The cold cut immediately through their thin coats, a sharp, biting cold that settled into bones and refused to leave. Greta Muller stood near the center of the group. She was 26 years old, though the last years had aged her far beyond that. Her dark hair was braided tightly against her head, more for practicality than modesty. Her hands, red and cracked from factory work, trembled despite being clenched into fists inside her sleeves. She kept her eyes forward, fixed on a chipped wall across the courtyard, because looking anywhere else felt dangerous. An American officer spoke briefly to a medic, then barked an order. The women were told, through gestures more than words, that they were to undergo a medical inspection. Disease was a constant fear in prisoner camps, and inspections were routine. But this one would not be done indoors. There would be no blankets, no privacy. The instruction was unmistakable: remove outer garments. A murmur rippled through the line. Breath turned into white clouds of panic. Fingers hesitated at buttons and frayed seams. Greta felt her stomach drop, not from modesty alone, but from vulnerability. The courtyard was ringed with armed soldiers, young men in olive uniforms, rifles slung over their shoulders, faces hardened by months of combat. Most stared straight ahead as trained. A few shifted uncomfortably. Greta's coat slid from her shoulders. The cold struck like a physical blow. Her body reacted instantly, skin tightening, breath catching, knees threatening to buckle. She told herself to stand still, to endure. Endurance had become a skill during the war, as necessary as eating or sleeping. Around her, other women did the same. Some cried quietly. One whispered a prayer. Another stared defiantly back at the soldiers, chin lifted in a silent challenge. The stone beneath their feet seemed to leach warmth directly from their bodies. Greta's thoughts raced despite her effort to remain calm. She wondered if her mother was still alive in Munich, if the factory she had worked in still stood. If this inspection would be the worst thing that happened today, or merely the beginning, then something shifted. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, a break in the rigid stillness of military order. Greta sensed movement before she saw it, a change in the rhythm of boots, the soft crunch of snow where no one was supposed to step. One soldier had moved. He was young, not much older than Greta herself. His uniform was worn, the fabric faded at the elbows and knees. A name patch was stitched above his pocket, though Greta couldn't read it from where she stood. What she noticed most was where his eyes were not. They were lowered. The soldier stepped forward out of formation, each pace deliberate, as though he had already accepted whatever consequences waited at the end of them. The sound of his boots seemed impossibly loud in the frozen air. Somewhere behind him, a sharp intake of breath. Someone muttered his name. He stopped a few feet in front of the line. Greta's heart hammered. She didn't know what was happening, only that the rules had changed, and that change was dangerous. The soldier unfastened his jacket. Slowly, carefully, he slid it off his shoulders and folded it once, as if handling something fragile. Then, to Greta's astonishment, he lowered himself onto one knee in the snow. His gaze remained fixed on the ground, his jaw clenched, his face flushed from more than the cold. Without a word, he extended the jacket toward her. The courtyard seemed to fall silent, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something heavier. Expectation, shock, a moment stretched thin as wire. Greta didn't move at first. She wasn't sure she was allowed to. She wasn't sure this was real. But the soldier stayed there, unmoving, arm outstretched, eyes still down. And in that frozen moment, before consequences and commands came crashing back in, Greta felt something she hadn't felt in years, not safety, not relief, dignity. The silence did not last. It shattered the moment an officer's voice cut through the frozen air, sharp and incredulous. Orders were shouted in English, too fast for Greta to understand, but the meaning was clear in the tone alone. Anger, disbelief, authority being challenged in front of witnesses. The kneeling soldier did not move. Snow gathered on his shoulders and darkened the fabric of the jacket still extended toward her. His hand trembled slightly now, whether from cold or consequence, Greta could not tell. She stared at the jacket as if it might disappear if she looked away. Around her, the other women stood frozen in shock, their fear momentarily overtaken by something else. Hope so sudden it almost hurt. Take it. A whisper breathed from somewhere beside her. Greta swallowed. Her fingers, stiff and numb, reached forward. When they brushed the wool fabric, warmth seemed to radiate through her skin even before she pulled it around her shoulders. It smelled faintly of smoke, oil, and something human. Soap, maybe, or home. She clutched it closed, her breath hitching as heat returned in painful pins and needles. The soldier finally rose, stepping back into the snow without ever lifting his eyes. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then another soldier broke formation. He was taller, broader, his face older and lined. Without ceremony, he shrugged off his own coat and stepped forward, draping it around the shoulders of a woman to Greta's left. He did not kneel, he did not speak, he simply did it, as though the decision had been waiting all along for permission that never came. A third followed, then a fourth. 6 jackets changed hands in less than a minute. The courtyard descended into chaos, not loud, but electric. Officers barked commands. A medic tried to intervene, gesturing frantically that inspections were mandatory, that disease did not care about dignity. But something had already shifted. The rigid lines of authority bent under the weight of conscience. The inspection was halted. The women were ordered, more gently now, to step back, to redress, to wait. Some clutched borrowed jackets like lifelines. Others covered their faces, tears streaking down cheeks, reddened by cold. Greta pulled the collar up to her chin and hugged herself, her knees weak with delayed reaction. She dared just once to glance at the soldier who had knelt, Private Daniel Cooper. She learned his name later, but in that moment she saw only a young man staring straight ahead, jaw tight, shoulders squared, bracing for impact. He looked no different from the others now, except for the absence of his jacket, and the quiet certainty in his posture, as if he had already decided that whatever happened next was worth it. It came swiftly. He was pulled aside, along with the others who had followed him. Voices rose. One officer waved a clipboard furiously. Another gestured toward the women, toward the rules, toward the war itself, as if any of it could explain what had just happened. Daniel did not argue. He did not explain. He stood at attention, hands at his sides, eyes forward. Insubordination. Someone said. The word landed like a stamp. Greta was marched away before she could see what punishment followed. She wanted to turn back, to say something, "Thank you," or "I will remember," or "Please don't." But the moment passed as quickly as it had arrived. She was led into a drafty room with cracked windows and told to sit. The jacket remained on her shoulders. No one tried to take it. For the next 3 days she wore it constantly. It was too big, the sleeves swallowing her hands, the hem brushing her knees. At night she wrapped it around herself like armor against the cold and the fear. During the day she traced the seams with her fingers, memorizing the weight of it, the way it felt to be protected without being owned. Other women shared similar stories in hushed voices. Some cried as they spoke. Some laughed softly, incredulous that such a thing had happened at all. They did not know what became of the soldiers. Rumors spread, extra duty, formal reprimands, notes added to permanent records. No one spoke of prison or worse, and Greta hoped that meant mercy had flowed both ways. When she was released weeks later, the jacket went with her. No one stopped her. She folded it carefully and carried it across borders and through ruins, back to a life that would never be the same. Years passed. Decades even. The war ended. New nations formed. Children were born. Hair turned gray, but the jacket remained, and so did the memory of a young soldier who had knelt in the snow, eyes lowered, and reminded her, at the coldest moment of her life, that humanity had not entirely frozen to death.